Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. This is part 59 of ASP.NET Core tutorial. In this video, we will discuss the difference between status code pages with redirects middleware component and status code pages with reexecute. This is continuation to our previous video, part 58. So please watch part 58 before proceeding. At the moment, within our application, we are using UseStatusCodePages WithRedirects middleware component, and we are on the list view. List view right now. We see the full list of employees as expected and now we need to launch browser developer tool. So how to launch the browser developer tool? F12, open developer tool. Okay, I am on the network tab and there is no traffic here. You can see everything is clear here. And then let's navigate to /foo/bar. So navigate to /foo/bar. /foo/bar. Notice we see our custom error view. Sorry, the resource you requested could not be found. And we also have a link here to navigate back to the home page. This happens because the original URL that we have provided, that is /foo/bar, does not match with any route in our application. So the middleware component, that we are using, that is status code pages with redirects. It redirected us this middleware UseStatusCodePages with redirects redirected us to this URL. /error /404, and that is how we get to see our custom error view. Now let's understand what is actually happening behind the scene by inspecting the complete request and response cycles. When we issued a request, to this /foo/bar, so the request that we have issued, for /foo/bar will flow through this HTTP request processing pipeline that we have set up using this section in our program.cs file. Let's walk through exactly what is happening in pipeline and environment setup. When you issue a request like /foo/bar, here is how it moves through the middleware. We configured first environment check. Since our launch setting.json sets ASP.NET Core environment to development, since our launch setting.json sets ASP.NET Core environment to development, so this block is skipped. That means no exception handler redirect to /home/error, no HSTS enforcement. Instead, in development, ASP.NET Core shows the developer exception page automatically. Okay, here you should pay attention that in the previous video we have used the exclamation mark, which is the logical not operator in C#. App.environment is development refers app.environment is development return true if the app is running in the development environment. Means without this exclamation mark, the logical not operator, without this logical not operator, app.environment.is development returns true if the app is running in the development environment. If we use this exclamation mark, that is logical not operator, we are saying the app is not in development environment. Then run this block. Means in production or staging, use a generic error handler /home/error instead of showing detailed developer errors. Enables HSTS strict transport security, which forces browser to use HTTPS for security. And what are development, staging, and production? We have discussed this in the previous video, but will again discuss it here. ASP.NET Core uses environments to let you configure behavior differently depending on where the app runs. Development, first of all, development used on your local machine. Development used on your local machine. Shows detailed error pages with developer exception page with stark traces. Easier debugging but not safe for end user. And what is staging? A test server that mimics production. Lets you test deployment before going live. Usually hides detailed errors but may have logging enabled. Production. What is production? The live environment where real users access your app. Must be secure, stable, and user-friendly. Shows friendly error pages like /home/error instead of raw exceptions. Use HSTS caching and performance optimizations. We can set the environment using the ASP.NET Core environment variable set x. We can set the ASP.NET Core environment variable to development, staging, or production. Now, what is the difference between program.cs pipeline and startup.cs configure method? In older ASP.NET Core versions, you had a startup.cs file with configure services method, register services, configure method, define middleware pipeline. In .NET 6, including .NET 8, you are using program.cs, combines both into a minimal hosting model. Builder.service add controller with views method replaces configure services. Variable app builder.build plus middleware calls app.usexyz replaces configure method. So conceptually, startup.configure method is equal to program.cs pipeline app.use app.map. The difference is just syntax and structure. Functionally, they do the same thing. Define the HTTP request pipeline. Define the request pipeline. Right now, we have added a app.usestatusCodePages with redirects middleware. Okay. So the exclamation, the logical not operator means not development. So we need a development environment for our app. So we remove that exclamation logical not operator from this if block. Okay, so once again, now again talk about exactly what is happening in pipeline and an environment setup. When you issue a request like /foo/bar, here is how it moves through the middleware. We configured first environment check. This if block. This if block is the environment check. Okay. First environment check, since our launch setting .json setups, since our launch setting .json sets ASP.NET Core environment to development. So this if block is skipped. This if block is skipped. That means the exception handler redirect to /home/error. The exception handler redirects to /home/error. No HSTS before. No HSTS enforcement. Instead, in development, ASP.NET Core shows the developer exception page automatically. HTTPS redirection. App.use HTTPS redirection. Any HTTP request is redirected to HTTPS. Static files. Static files, app.usestaticfiles. If slash foo slash bar matched, if slash foo slash bar matched a file in www root, in file in www root, in www root, a file in www root, it would be served here. It would be served here. Since slash foo slash bar is not a static file, since slash foo slash bar is not a static file, the request continues. The request continues status code pages with redirects. The request continues status code pages with redirects. App request continues status code pages with redirects. App dot use status code pages with redirects slash error slash status code slash status code placeholder. This is the placeholder. This middleware, now this middleware use app dot use status code pages with redirect error slash placeholder. This middleware intercepts error status code. This middleware intercept error status codes like 404, 500 instead of plain text. It redirects to slash error slash error slash status code. Example slash foo slash bar, no matching controller. 404 redirect to slash error slash 404. Your error controller should have an action like error int code. Error int code that returns the appropriate view. Example not found .cstml for 404 routing. App.use routing matches the request against your route templates. Authorization app.use authorization checks policies, roles if you have set them. Controller route mapping. Slash foo slash bar is intercepted as controller equals foo slash controller. Foo controller. Action equals bar. Controller equals foo controller. Action equal to bar. If those do not exist, 404 redirect to slash error slash 404. If those do not exist, 404 redirect to slash errors slash 404. Terminal middleware. terminal middleware app.run ends the pipelines. Terminal middleware app.run ends the pipeline. No further middleware runs after this. Environment setting. In our launch setting, in our launch setting .json file, see this line of code. All profiles HTTP, HTTPS, IIS Express, all profiles HTTP, IIS Express, all profiles HTTP, HTTPS, IIS Express are set to development, So when you run from Visual Studio, or .NET run app.environment.isDevelopment returns true. So when you run from Visual Studio or .NET run app.environment.isDevelopment returns true. That means the exception handler plus HSTS block is not active, is not active. Instead, you get the developer exception page for unhandled errors, and your status code pages with redirect handles 400 or 500. If you wanted to test production, you had change it to production, or simply you can put exclamation mark the not logical operator to run your application in production environment. Okay, either put the exclamation mark, that is the logical not operator, to run your application in production environment, or you instead using this exclamation mark, you could change development from here, development to production. Okay. Example, request /foo/bar environment equals development. So the flow of request is as follow. So the flow of request is as follow. So the flow of request is as follow. Skip exception handler plus HSTS redirect to HTTPS if needed. Redirect to HTTPS if needed. Static files check. No match. Routing looks for foo controller. Routing looks for foo controller dot bar not found. Status code pages status code pages with redirects triggers redirect to /error/404. Error controller handles /error/404. Returns you are not found. Returns you are not found. Return you are not found .cstml. So your application is running in development mode. So your application is running in development mode. A request like /foo/bar will go through the pipeline, fail to match a controller action, trigger a 404 redirect, redirect to /error/404, and then your error controller should render not found .cstml. One more thing to understand. What this exclamation symbol. We have already discussed about this exclamation symbol, the logical not operator. It means if the environment is not development, but our environment is development, so we do not use this exclamation operator, logical operator. So if we use this exclamation logical operator, then the environment is not development. So in production staging, the block runs. Exception go to /home/error. HSTS is enabled. In development, the block is skipped. In development, this block is skipped. You get the developer exception page instead if you remove the exclamation symbol from here. Then it means if the environment is development. So in development, exceptions will be redirected to /home/error and HSTS will be enabled. In production staging, the block is skipped. No exception handler, no HSTS. Why this matter? The default recommended pattern is with the default recommended pattern is with the exclamation not logical operator symbol. Only use exception handler plus HSTS in non-development environments. Reason. What is the reason behind this? In development, you want detailed error. Pages, developer exception page to debug issues. In production, you don't want to expose stock traces to users. So you redirect to a friendly error page /home/error and enforce security HSTS HSTS stand for HTTP strict. HSTS stand for HTTP strict transport security. HSTS stand for strict HTTP strict transport security. In our case, since our launch setting.json sets, in our case, since our launch setting.json sets ASP.NET Core environment development. with the exclamation exclamation symbol, the block is skipped. You see developer exception page. Without this symbol, the block runs. You had be redirected to /home/error and HSTS would be active even in development. With symbol, error handling HSTS only in production staging. With symbol, with the logical not operator exclamation symbol, error handling plus HSTS only in production staging. Without this exclamation symbol or logical not operator symbol, error handling plus HSTS only in development. That is why the symbol is not there. It ensures you get developer friendly errors in development and use user friendly error pages in production. This piece of middleware middleware look at the status code 404. This piece of middleware looks at the status code 404. It is a non-success status code. So what it does is issues a 302 request. So what it does, what this middleware does, look at the status code 404. It is a non-success status code. So what it does is issue a 302 request. Issue a 302 request. Look under the network tab here. It issue a 302 request. Look under the network tab. The request for this URL /who/bar resulted in this status code. In this status code 302 found. What does this mean? Well, status code 302 means the URI of the requested resource has been temporarily changed. So what this mean? Well, status code 302 means the URI of the requested resource has been temporarily changed. Now we issued a request for /foo. Now we issued a request for /foo/bar. And then we have a status code, and then we have a status code 302. And then we have a status code 302. This means this URI /foo/bar has temporarily changed to something else. And what is that? Same thing else. Well, we have configured that using this middleware. Using this middleware component, and that is /error/ non-success status code, and that is /error/ the non-success status code, in this case 404. In this case 404. So this URL, so this URL /foo/bar has temporarily changed. So this URL /foo/bar has temporarily changed to /error/404. So this middleware, so this middleware component issues another GET request. So we see here another network tab, another GET request. You see another. So this middleware component issues another GET request. So we see here another network tab, another GET request. Another GET request immediately issued to this URI /error/404 and is this present right after a, and this is present right after a GET request to /foo/bar, and that is happening because of this status code, and that is happening because of this status code 302. So the redirect request for this URI, so the redirect request for this URI /error/404 passes through this HTTPS request pipeline. HTTPH passes through this HTTP request processing pipeline. Again, this request is issued by this middleware component. This request is issued. This request is issued by this middleware component. So it is passed from this component. So it is passed from this component to the next piece of middleware, to the next piece of middleware static files. It has got nothing to do with that request. So it passes that to the map controller route. So it passes that to the map controller route middleware. Map controller route middleware finds a route that matches with this URI, /error/404. We have the error controller. So the action method, we have the error controller. So the action method, within this controller is executed. It is returning the not found. It is returning the not found view. So the required HTML. Here is the required HTML. Not found. Where is the not found? Where is the not found? Detail, create. Not found. Not found as CHTML. Not found CHTML. Employee. This is the. Okay. So the required HTML is generated along with the success status code 200. This is not found. This is the HTML not found. So the required HTML is generated along with the success status code 200. So that response is then passed from the map controller route middleware to the static file. The static file middleware will then pass it onto this status code pages with redirects middleware, which is then sent over the network to the client. Notice in the browser, we have the HTML of our not found view rendered. We have the HTML not found view render under the network tab. For this URI, under the network tab, for this URI /error/404, we have the success status code. We have the success status code 200. Now here is another important point to keep in mind. Our initial request was for this URI. Our initial request was for this URI /foo/bar, and as the name implies, this middleware component, status code pages with redirects. The word redirect is the key. The word redirect is the key. So this middleware component, issues a redirect request to this URI /error/404. Because a redirect is issued. The URI in the address bar. Changes. The URI in the address bar changes from status foo. The URI in the address bar changes from /foo/bar to /error/404. If you closely observe this entire request and response cycle, so far as the browser is concerned, there was no 404 error. Ultimately, in the end, we are returning the success status code. Ultimately, In the end, we are returning the success status code 200 OK. When an error actually occurred, this is not semantically correct. This is not semantically correct. For this reason, lot of people do not like to use this. For this reason, lot of people do not like to use this status code pages with redirects middleware component. Instead, let's use status code pages with re-execute. Before that, you should see once again error / 404, but our original first request was /foo/bar. It then changes to /error / 404. Now, instead let's use status code pages with re-execute. Status code pages with re-execute. Let's use status code pages with re-execute. This is a clever piece of middleware. This is a clever piece of middleware. Instead of issuing a redirect request, it re-executes this HTTP. It re-executes this HTTP processing pipeline. So let's save these changes. Or build the solution and see the behavior. So build the solution and then see the behavior. Go back to the browser and see the behavior. As you can see here, /error / 404. So see the behavior that we get with this piece of middleware. Let's clear the network. Let's clear the network. Clear the network tab. And issue a request to /foo/bar. And issue the request /foo/bar. And issue a request to /foo/bar. Notice from an end user standpoint, we don't see much different in the behavior. We still see the same HTML. We see the same HTML of our not found view. Rendered as before. Let's understand what is happening behind the scene. Let's understand what is happening behind the scene. So as usual, go back to the Visual Studio. So as usual, the request /foo/bar will be processed by the HTTP H request processing pipeline. So the request first arrive at the piece of middleware. It will then passes to static files. Static files will pass it to the map controller route. Map controller will obviously not be able to find a route that matches /foo/bar, so it returns status code 404. So that response is passed from map controller route to static file, from static file to this piece of middleware, So this piece of middleware will intercept. That non-success status code 404 and then re-execute this pipeline this pipeline with this new URI /error/404. So that request is passed to static files, and static file will pass it to map controller route. Map controller route will now find a route that matches this URI, that matches to this URI /error/404. So the code within error controller, within error controller is executed. So the code within our error controller is executed, and the required HTML is generated. And the required HTML is generated. And that response along with the success status code is passed, and that response along with the success status code is passed from map controller route middleware to static file middleware. Static file middleware will then pass it to this status code pages with re-execute middleware component. Now here is what the interesting thing that this middleware component do. It will take the HTML that is provided to it and then replaces the success status code with the original 404 status code. Notice another network tab for this request. Notice another network tab for this request, URI /foo/bar. We have the status code 404. We have the status code 404 not found, and not 200 OK, That is because when the request is processed, by map controller route, it returned us the not found. It returned us the not found view HTML. It returned us not found view HTML. And success status code status code 200 OK. And success status code 200 OK. But then as the response is flowing back through this HTTP request processing pipeline, when that response reaches this piece of middleware, when this response reaches this piece of middleware component, it knows it has to replace that success status code 200 OK with 404 not found, and that is why we see for this URI, and that is why we see for this URI /foo/bar 400 not found, /foo/bar 400 not found. This is the correct behavior. This is the correct behavior. There was a 404 error on the server, and it is reflected in the client browser with the status code 404. Now, another important point to keep in mind is this piece of middleware. This piece of middleware component re-executes the pipeline. It does not issue a redirect request. And because of that reason, we are able to process our original URL. We are able to process our original URL. See here /foo/bar. Notice it has not changed from /foo/bar to /foo/bar to /error /404. Here you can see this. We still have /foo/bar. It is not changed from /foo/bar to /error /404. When we are using the middleware component, when we are using this middleware component, we can also write code to retrieve the path that causes the 404 error. In addition to the path, we can also retrieve a query string value if there is a query string on the URI. Let me explain what I mean. We know this is the error controller. We know this is the error controller. Error controller action method. We know this is the error controller action method that is executed when we have a 404 error. The first thing that I am going to do here is create a variable. The first thing I am going to do here is create a variable. Let's call the variable status code result. Let's call the variable status code result. Status code result. Assign status code result. Assign this to HTTP context. Dot features dot get. dot features dot get, and the feature that we want to get is I status code re-execute features. I status code re-execute feature. I status code re-execute feature. Let's bring in the required namespace. Let's bring in the required namespace. Okay. Next on the view bag object, let's store the path that caused the 404 error. Let's call the property path, and notice on this object next on the view bag object, let's store the path that caused the 404 error. Let's call the property path, and notice on this object we have original path base, and original query string, We want the original path, so let's take that property value. So let's take the property value, and let's also create another property on the view bag object. And let's take another property on view bag object. Let's also create another property on the view bag object for query string. Let's call the property QoS. Let's call the property QoS. Let's call the property QoS, and let's take the query string property value. And let's take the query string property value. Finally, in this not found, in this not found view, let's display both the property values, path and query string. So let's make 2 copies of this expression. So let's make two copy of this expression. So let's make two copy of this expression and then change the property name here to path. Change the property name here to path, and this one to query string QS. Let's issue a request to /foo/bar. Let's also include a query string. First of all, we need to save the changes. Build the solution and go back to the browser and close this browser developer tool. And now let's issue a request to /foo/bar. Let's also include a query string. /foo/bar. Let's also include a query string. ABC equals XYZ. Notice we have the path. So issue the notice we have the path that causes 404 error. We also have the query string ABC along with this value XYZ. As the name implies, status code pages with re-executes. Status code pages with re-executes middleware component issues a redirect, and as a result, the URL in the address bar as the name implies, status code pages with re-execute redirect. As the name implies, status code with redirects middleware middleware component issues a redirect. And as a result, the URL in the address bar changes. In our case, the original URL /foo/bar changes to /error/404. The problem with this middleware component, the problem with this middleware component is it returns a success status code 200 OK. It returns a success status code 200 OK when actually an error occurred, which is not when actually an error on the server occurred, and this is not semantically correct. Use status code pages with re-execute. Use status code pages with re-execute. As the name implies, this middleware component re-executes. This middleware component re-executes the pipeline and returns the original status code, in our case 404. This is the right behavior. This is the right behavior. There was a 404 error on the server, and it is reflected on the client in the browser with the status code 404. As this component re-executes the pipeline, and not issue a redirect request. We also preserve the original URL that caused the 404 error, in our case /foo/bar. That's it in this video. Thank you for listening. Have a nice day.